We're going to have Stefan do a presentation on nutrition, which is huge for our sport. And we just talked about mental health, and I can tell you mental health and nutrition and what's going on with our athletes are hugely connected. There's discussions that we have a lot about like an athlete that should have been moving up the weight division, and they're now struggling with the idea of like, what am I doing? They're never happy because they're so hungry and they're here like this. There's this huge connection. And again, it is, again, just recently we had an Alberta athlete not make weight at the World Championships. Okay? I was there personally. It's an athlete that I've worked with, did a lot of good things, followed a lot of good things, but at the end, I can tell you, like, it was a situation, you know, we're talking about the rules of two. I'm glad that I had two coaches with me, because there was a point where ethically I was questioning what I'm doing as a coach. What am I doing right now? Like, I know that probably pushing her at this point to make the weight is the most wrong thing that I should be doing. But at the same time, you're stuck. You're stuck. You're in this situation of like, what am I doing? But that what you're doing is like lifestyle, and it's so far from that moment. That moment is a moment now you're just trying to get through that moment the best you can to help that person and put yourself and protect them, but it's a moment. But that moment starts before. And so he's going to talk about the before so that we hopefully avoid these moments in the future. That decisions, discussions, and all this happens before we get to that moment. Okay, so we're going to just turn it over to Stefan, and he's going to do his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, hey folks, I know we're catching this just before lunch, so that's always a fun time to talk about nutrition. Everyone's getting a little hungry, so we'll see how we do. Kick. Jump into it. Just a quick little spiel about myself. Grew up in Winnipeg. Speed skating was the sport that I got pretty involved with. If you want to be good at speed skating, National Center's out of Calgary, so I moved out to Calgary. Was fortunate enough to do a number of years on the national team. Really enjoyed sort of the nutrition aspects of my training. I didn't know a whole heck of a lot, but I found that my ability to fuel my body was better than most of my teammates, most of my competitors, and that allowed me to recover quicker between training sessions, made me beat guys that were better than me on the days that mattered. And as I said, I still didn't really know all that much about what I was doing, but I was having a lot of fun sort of helping out some of my teammates, especially towards the tail end of my career. With sort of their nutrition needs. And then I kind of thought, well, end of my skating career, what am I going to do next? Decided to go back to school, went up to Edmonton, became a dietitian. Was looking forward to getting completely away from sport. I thought clinical was where I wanted to be. I do a little bit of work in clinical, but the longer that I was sort of away from sport, the more I realized that athletes are the absolute best. They don't necessarily care about nutrition, but they care about their sport. So if I can convince them that nutrition matters, their buy-in's 100%, and it's just a really fun group to work with. So since kind of getting back into the sport world, I've got some great groups that I get to work with, some national team volleyball athletes, bobsleigh, I've got some figure skaters, I've got some track cyclists now, worked with the Canada Summer Games, get to work with the Winter Games, so good variety. Lots going on, lots of different issues, lots of different challenges, and lots of fun people I get to spend time with. Still coach a little bit, speed skating coach, so you know, I hope that makes it easier for me to convey some of that coaching knowledge with you guys. And I absolutely love that you're having this big coaching session where you're able to talk about some of these nutrition needs. I know the coaching in the locker, there's those like little snippet modules that talk about nutrition. They're like 2 pages. The info on them is good, but there's not a lot there. So yeah, happy to come in today and sort of chat with you guys. What I was hoping to talk about today, this will be a very intro presentation. So things that I want to talk about are real fundamental skills. And the reason behind that is it makes such a big difference. I'll talk about that in kind of my sport nutrition pyramid, but we're really guilty of in sport that we focus on the very top pieces of our sport nutrition pyramid. I'll explain that in a sec. But we're looking for those magic bullets. Like we're looking for the really cool things. And a lot of the time, our athletes they don't have the fundamentals down. They don't know how to cook. They aren't eating within a certain time frame after their workouts. But they're really stressed about what their creatine doses should be. they're really stressed about making weight, 12 months out of a competition when they're not eating 3 meals a day. So it's so beneficial to talk about some of those foundational pieces, which is what I'm going to spend a lot of time on today. I'll talk a little bit about sort of their energy needs, why those fluctuate, how we adjust for those. I'll talk a little bit about some recovery pieces, and then I'm going to spend a small bit of time, a couple slides, on sort of making weight, but more specifically things for you guys to watch as coaches about low energy availability and some of the risks that go alongside that. We'll make sure we've got some time for questions. The last group that I got to talk to from Judo asked a lot of great questions. They were athletes, so the bar is set high for you guys. As promised, this beautiful thing here, this is the sport nutrition pyramid. You know how pyramids work, there's a big chunk at the bottom, there's a little piece at the top. Big chunk at the bottom, I say this makes up about 90% of an athlete's performance. This is things like their healthy relationship with food. This is the daily habits that they're doing, eating from all different food groups. It's not the sexy stuff, it's not the cool things you're going to see on TikTok, it's not the things that we're hearing on the podcast, but this makes a tremendous difference on an athlete's ability to train properly, to recover properly, and to have that good long-term health. So spending a lot of time on that core foundation piece, I know it's boring for the athletes, it's boring for the coaches, but it really does make the big difference. Moving up the pyramid, this sort of middle chunk, I say this makes up about 9% of an athlete's performance. This is the sport-specific piece. This is when we start talking about timing, so maybe their recovery nutrition within a certain window after training. It might be adjusting their diet depending on where we are in the build. If you're in a hypertrophy phase versus a volume phase, how we're going to sort of fluctuate those things makes a difference. It absolutely does. It's not nearly as big of a difference as that core foundation piece. But the athletes tend to like this topic a little bit more just because it gets a little bit more sport specific and they think it's more exciting. Things like male athlete health, female athlete health, adjusting for competitions, all that kind of comes into that middle chunk. The tippy top up here, this targeted approach, I figure this makes about 1% of an athlete's performance. This is things like event specific, this is heat camps, altitude camps. Absolutely it does make a difference, but it's if you're not doing the other 99% right, that 1% that you're chasing really doesn't give you much. When I was getting ready for our Paralympic Games last year, I held my athletes' hands like a couple weeks out where we were given very specific, I want you eating this many grams of this food at this time. It was really dialed in. There was a bit of benefit that we're going to see from that. It's a lot of work for the athletes, but when they're at that very top level, then that is something that we would recommend. But I'm also working with my athletes to make sure that they have these other pieces dialed in, because if we just start focusing on that targeted approach, we throw that 99% away, our pyramid's going to collapse in on itself, and that's no good. So I've got these sweet arrows here to sort of symbolize that as we kind of build on these topics, we start off with our core foundation, we work our way up the pyramid, we don't get to forget about the healthy eating habits, we don't get to forget about that good relationship with food, we're just kind of building on top of it. If we do spend a little bit of time thinking about getting ready for making weight, if we're thinking about event-specific nutrition, we're going to focus on that for a little bit, and then when we're done with it, we're coming back to that broader approach. Every talk that I do, I probably touch on the sport nutrition pyramid just sort of to have that little reminder of even if we're talking about game-specific stuff, if we're talking about something else, just sort of where we are in there, to have that reinforcement piece about what the core foundation bits are and why they're just so helpful. I love my pyramids. This is the second pyramid in my presentation. I think it's the last one. So things that I kind of wanted to talk about today, things that I know a whole heck of a lot about. Hydration, nutrient-rich diet, and adequate energy intake, pieces in white. As a dietitian, that's my bread and butter. The pieces in red up around the top, mental preparedness, muscle recovery, managing stress, adequate sleep. That's not my area of expertise, but I'm going to talk a little bit about sleep and stress management, just because sometimes it falls through the cracks. Sometimes mental performance will talk about this, sometimes your coaches are going to talk about this, but sometimes it falls through the cracks. And what we really tend to find, you guys know this as well as anybody, but your athletes are out there, they're working so hard. They're working hard at training, they're working hard in the gym. The big gains that we tend to see for athletes are the stuff they're doing off the mat, outside of the gym. When they start getting their diet dialed in, when they start getting their sleep dialed in, that's when we really see the performance take that next jump. So, they can be out there, they can be working as hard as they possibly can at training day after day after day. If the diet's no good, if the sleep's not there, you really struggle to get those gains. So just touching quickly on the sleep and the stress, because sometimes it does fall through the gaps. All right. Quickly here, just sort of healthy relationship with food. When I'm talking about that, which will come up a few times today, so what am I thinking about? I'm going to read through these ones. Your eating choices don't dictate your mood or how you're going to feel about yourself. Really important. We want our athletes to be able to eat foods because they enjoy it, not just because there's a training benefit alongside of it. They should be able to eat because something tastes good. That's a huge component to it. Recognizing that all foods have a place in performance, so knowing there's a time for simple carbohydrates versus complex carbs, knowing that fat, knowing that protein, all these things have a role in our diet and how we can incorporate those. If we are making any changes, there's a reason why we're making those changes. It's not just because Joe Rogan told us to do it. There's a very specific reason for why we're going to change something. If you are going to change it as well, you can change it because it's a culturally acceptable thing. You know, if you've got somebody who's having a cultural dinner with all their family, great, we love that. You know, we don't want them to say you can't have this, this traditional food that your grandparents made because it doesn't fit in your training diet today. No, we want to have those moments where they're able to experience that. So lots of that kind of comes into the healthy relationship with food. It's super important. But yeah, that's sort of my quick one on there. Performance nutrition. I'm pulling all these up so you guys don't get surprised. When I think about performance nutrition, number one, it's got to be flexible. When you're flying to a new venue and you're expecting to land and eat at the boosted juice, but the flight gets delayed and now the boosted juice is closed, we can't have our athletes having a breakdown, having a meltdown at that point. You've got to sort of be able to roll with those punches. We know that competitions get delayed, that start times get delayed, things move up. So just being able to adapt for your plan. You've got your plan in place, but we know it's going to change, and that's okay. We need our athletes to be flexible. I think an awful lot about food, about nutrition, proper diet. My goal is so that you guys and your athletes don't have to think that hard about it. If I can sort of boil down some of the big hitting points and pass it on to you guys, you can pass that to your athletes, and they don't have to spend all their time stressing and thinking about their food, their diet, just so they know these broader pictures. That's what we're looking for. We'll talk a lot about health risks kind of towards the tail end of the presentation here, but we're looking to have strong athletes and strong human beings for the rest of their lives. We know that especially with the low energy availability, if somebody's in the state for too long, there's lots of health risks that we see, whether that's bone, whether that's heart, whether that's cardiovascular. There's lots of things that we're trying to avoid, so making sure that our athletes are well fueled is very, very important. We're going to talk about nutrient-dense foods and nutritious foods that they enjoy. If I'm standing up here saying, broccoli is the absolute best, you guys need to be eating broccoli all day long, and you hate broccoli, that's no good. I want to work with you, with your athletes, to try and find the foods that they're going to enjoy that can still sort of get that nutritional punch back in for them. Anything that we're doing, anytime we're making changes, there's a very specific reason for it. It aligns with our performance goals, with our training calendar, with where we are in the competition schedule. I really try and preach a food first but not food only approach. So just when we're thinking about supplements, there's a time and a place for supplements. If we can get that need through food, it's almost always going to be better for us. We learn so much about supplements kind of the farther into it we go, but if you're up on, say, the branched chain amino acids, the essential amino acids, there's lots of buzz about those right now. A couple of years ago, we thought that they were just the BCAAs were the absolute godsend, and this was really going to save everybody. And then we realized that it really doesn't make that much of a difference. That whole protein's probably going to be better, and now there's a lot of hype about essential amino acids. So we're learning, and there's always new things that come out. People get really excited about it, but it takes a while for a lot of that to really trickle down. As a general rule, if we can get our stuff through Whole Foods, you're going to be checking all those boxes off, and that you're just going to sort of see that benefit to things that we don't even know we're missing right now. On that supplement note, anything that our athletes are taking, ideally we want it to be tested. So third-party testing, Informed Choice, Informed Sport, NSF, those are all third-party testing companies, just to minimize that sort of doping contamination risk. Good to get that in early. And I do mention this, so I'm absolutely not opposed to supplements. Time for supplements might be, say, you've got an athlete who is coming from school, then they have to go to training. They've been away from any refrigeration for their whole day, and it's just not practical for them to bring, Greek yogurt, to bring a chicken breast with them to their training sessions. So maybe something like that. That's a good time when they want that protein bar, when they want that scoop of protein. I'd encourage you to try and find the third-party tested stuff, but that's when we would say this is a time and a place for it. Yeah, evidence-based. I spend a lot of time doing sort of my research, and that's mostly so you guys don't have to read those journal articles. All right. When I'm thinking about judo specifically, you're an explosive, powerful sport. Very quick movements, so we want to make sure that ATP stores, those are topped up, so you can make those really fast, quick movements. We know that it's a very technical sport, how you're positioning your body, where you're making holds, how you're positioning yourself in relation to your opponent. A lot of technique involved there, and that takes a lot of brain power. The more that our athletes are using their brains, the more they're thinking, the more carbohydrates they're burning. So, being in a carbohydrate deficient state, when they're trying to be very technical, it's going to be extremely difficult for them. It goes alongside accuracy as well, where you're sort of having, where you're landing grabs, where your footwork is. All of that takes a ton of accuracy. We also know that it's not just a one and done. It's not just a one move and then you're stopped. It's not one round and then you're stopped. They're doing events over and over. They're also doing training. That's not just a really quick bout. You might be doing running, you might be doing long mat work. So even though we have that explosive, quick movements that are so essential for us, we also need to make sure they're fueling to get through a 2-hour training session. So lots going on with them. And then, of course, our athletes don't only do what we tell them to do. We know they're also playing soccer in gym class. They're biking to and from their work. They have other stressors that are going on in their lives. So even though they might be following your program to the letter, they're probably doing some extra things, which they're kids, they're going to be doing that. That's great. But just trying to factor a little bit of that into their nutrition. So even if you're planning a taper and you're thinking that, well, they're just down to a stretching session today, it should be an easy day, so I'll remind them that, maybe we're going to dial the food back a little bit today. If they said, hey, it's an easy day, so I'm going to go for that longer bike ride, or I'm going to go play soccer, those are things we kind of want to factor into our nutrition needs. All right. Class participation time. What decides how much energy our athletes are going to need?
Their expenditure rate and where they are in their training cycle.
Sure. So how hard they're working. Somebody who's sitting on the couch versus someone who's running a marathon, they're going to have different needs. Anything else? I've got a few. You guys versus your kids? Age, thank you. Yeah, it's absolutely going to be one.
Male, female.
Sure. Yeah, gender makes a big difference. Typically, we see that males need a little bit more than females. It does fluctuate a little bit here and there, but for the most part, that's what we see.
Just size in general.
Love it. Yeah. Bigger bodies need more fuel. That's absolutely the case. Muscle mass is going to be a big one as well. So, the more muscle mass an athlete has, the more energy they're going to need. You guys did pretty good in the end here. So the ones that I've got, size, gender, lean body mass, training intensity. Genetics is a huge one. Tends to be very frustrating both for the athletes and the coaches, but it really is just how it is. You'll have two athletes that are roughly the same size, roughly the same age, they're doing roughly the same work, and one of them needs 5,000 calories a day and the other one needs 3. Great for the athlete's grocery bill, who has 3,000 calories a day. But it can be tricky when you're trying to sort of make weight to make those adjustments, like how you are able to sort of cut back on an athlete who has a higher metabolism versus a slower metabolism. And then these things change, so where we are in our growth trajectory. So we tend to see a big swing right around puberty. The athlete's needs go through the roof. Peters off a little bit after that. But yeah, it's gonna depend where the athlete is in their growth cycle. Big takeaway here, though, is just that everybody's needs are going to be different. So, you're not coming into training sessions saying, this is the training food that an Olympic athlete needs, and so all of you should be eating this. It's going to change drastically from athlete to athlete. Next participation question. What are the 3 macronutrients? The 3 things that give us energy?
Protein, carbs, fat.
Protein, carbs, fat. Heck yeah, thank you.
I get more PD points for that.
I'm giving you 0 PD points. I shouldn't tell you that, but I'm not.
I have a question on that.
Yeah,
Creatine,
yeah.
will it play the role in that?
In their energy needs?
Yeah.
Not too much. You do, creatine, one of the great things that it does is when an athlete gets to say if you're fully loaded in creatine, the extra little bit in your muscles will give you a little bit more energy around say set 7 or 8. So once somebody's pretty fatigued, they get that extra little burst. For some athletes it's about 50-50 who sees benefits, some don't. So you would get a little bit of a performance boost. It's not going to impact your total energy needs throughout the day. That would remain unchanged. But what we would see is that the athletes who are good responders to creatine, who are supplementing with creatine, are going to have that extra little bit of performance boost on some of their later sets.
Is it legal when we go to the competition and stuff like that, Coach?
Creatine is, it's always double check on the sort of the WADA list, on the CCES list, but it's not a banned substance. Good question. When we think of our macronutrients, the things that give us energy, when we think about athletes, everybody likes to say that protein is the most important. I'll disagree with that all day long and say that carbs are your most important. Carbs are what give us energy. So every time you're doing something that's explosive, every time you're doing something that's high intensity, you're using carbs. Every time you're doing something that's a long duration but higher intensity, you're using carbs. Number 1 source of fuel for your brain, carbohydrates. Also lots of vitamins, lots of minerals. There's so much hype right now about protein. We're seeing it absolutely everywhere. Everything's added with protein, and we've got to get this much protein in. I'm certain that in the next couple of years, it's going to circle back to carbs, and it's going to focus on fiber. The more that we're learning about fiber, about sort of the gut-brain connection, about our energy, about having good gut health, and how that plays into performance, into recovery, into hormone production, we're going to see lots and lots about fiber. So prepare yourselves. It's an exciting time.
Question on this too.
Yeah.
I don't see any rice in here.
We'll talk about sources of carbs pretty soon.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't you worry. We'll talk about sources.
Question on carbs, fast carbs and slow carbs.
Mhm.
You find fast carbs will prevent you from accessing energy? Like,
Will fast carbs prevent you?
yeah, because it raises your insulin levels. Is that?
No, it'll give you that quick hit of energy. So fast carbs are things that you don't have to break down as quickly. So really any of your sugars, we call those fast carbs. You'll see them in white rice, white bread, Gatorade, most of your energy gels, all those we would call fast carbs. What that's going to do is I'm going to have that probably within 30 to 60 minutes. I'm going to get this little energy spike. I'm going to feel good. It's going to be great. And then I'm going to crash after that. So it's a quick hit of energy. You get some good performance out of that, but it's not lasting. The difference between that and say a complex carb, which would be a slow digesting carbohydrate, so things like whole grains, quinoa, brown rice, most of your fruits and veggies, they take a little bit longer to digest. You don't get that really quick hit. It'll be a little bit more of a gradual. So if the quick carbs do that and come down, the complex carbs are going to do more like that and kind of come down. So you get more sustained energy. It's not quite as dramatic for an athlete. So there's times when, say, you're getting ready for a bout, when I want to make sure that my athlete's topped up with all the energy I can. 30 to 60 minutes outside of that bout, I'm looking for quick energy. I want that the white bread. Maybe I'm just going for a Gatorade or a gel, but that's going to give them more energy in the short duration than having a whole wheat pasta that just takes too long to digest. But if you're thinking 6 hours before an event, maybe that's the time when I'm going for something with a little bit more fiber. The athlete has more time to sort of digest that, and then I'd still probably top up with those quick hits of carbs. Is that kind of in line with? I know I said a bunch of things there. Okay.
Yeah. One more question.
Yeah.
Can you combine so you can keep that energy level at the max?
Yeah, that's the goal. And that's we would usually, so as a general guideline, we'd probably start dialing back the complex carbohydrates maybe a day to 2 days out of when we want them to perform their best. So maybe the night before, 2 nights before, that's when we start switching over to the less complex options, more of the the white bread, the white rice. But if they had that complex carbohydrates in them for the week leading up to it, then we're pretty sure that their muscles are topped up with all of the glycogen stores, all the ATP that we can possibly get in them. And then, short half hour before the event, that's where we're going to the sugars. So if you're combining all those together, that's sort of the hope to say we've given you the best chance to make sure that the muscles are fueled leading up in the long, and then in that short to top up all that energy.
Yeah, because competition is like multi-hour.
Mhm.
So like we're talking about morning to like afternoon.
Yeah, so 2-3 days out, again, it gets a little tricky with the weight making, depending, we can talk about that kind of later on, sort of how to play with the weight versus the optimal energy intake. But for optimal performance, to make sure our athletes are topped up with the energy, I would want to say 2 days out, we're still on the whole wheat, we're still on the complex stuff. Day or two out, that's when we start to switch into the white stuff. And then when they're in the short duration of, you have a bout, you have an hour rest, you have that bout, we're just looking for the quick hits of carbohydrates. So it's really just like you're focused on the sugars, you're focused on the white carbohydrates because we don't have time to digest it. But yeah, no, that's awesome. I love these questions. And you guys are jumping ahead because we've got slides about this. But big point of carbohydrates, though, they give us energy. Love that takeaway. What everybody thinks about is the most important macronutrient for athletes. Protein. It helps with muscle repair. Every time they're doing their workouts, they're making those little tears in their muscles. So in order to build those up stronger, you have to have protein in our diet in order to do that. Good for gaining strength, good for gaining muscle mass, but it's really not a very good fuel source. So pros and cons to protein. Fats, good for long-term energy storage. So if you're doing something that's pretty low intensity, walking around all day, heart rate's pretty low, you're probably going to be using fats as your primary energy source. Really important for hormone production. So good for building testosterone, good for building immune systems, good for long-term health. Lots of good things come out of fat. Our brain runs on carbohydrates, but in order for it to be healthy, we need a decent amount of fats in our diet. So pros to fats, absolutely.
Question.
Yes?
So the fat, are you considering like animal fat too, or just fat from foods and stuff?
Yeah, animal fats, we'll kind of talk about sources, but we don't see, most fats that a person's getting sort of in our diet, they're very rarely one. So it's usually a combination of a bunch of things. We typically would recommend, we would say, our unsaturated versus our saturated fats, and that's just how clogged up sort of the molecule is. So unsaturated fats are typically things that are liquid at room temperature. So things like olive oil would be an unsaturated fat, whereas a saturated fat would be a butter. So we would say it's probably better for you to get most of your fats from those unsaturated sources than your saturated sources. But as I say, most of them are a combination. So you'll have the butter, it's got some unsaturated, it's got some saturated, there's a good range of omega-3, 6, 9, which are all beneficial at different ratios. But yeah, there's really a benefit to most kinds of fats. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna quickly make you guys do this. Shout out as a group, shout out some carbohydrate sources. We've had a few.
Honey.
Honey, sure, sugars. What else we got? Pasta. Rice, yes.
Gluten. Did you ever try gluten rice?
Bread, love it.
Yeah.
Bread, pasta, yes.
Potatoes. Peanut butter.
Thank you. Potatoes, apples. What was that one?
Peanut butter.
We'll get to peanut butter in a bit. Peanut butter could have carbohydrate if it's, say, the Skippy that's got a fair bit of sugar in it. Then we're going to get some carbohydrates in it. If it's the just peanuts, probably not a lot of carbs in there. Yeah. Love it. So on my list, I've got bread, pasta, fruits, veggies, potatoes, cereals, oats, granola, crackers, juice. All those are our main sources of carbohydrates. What kind of gets tricky is that very few foods are strictly one. Most foods are a combination of a number of things. So that's why I've got my fancy Venn diagram that sort of just has some overlapping components. So any guesses on some foods that are carbs and protein combined?
Chickpeas.
Nice. Beans and lentils are going to be our biggest ones. They're about half protein, half carbohydrates. So lots of good stuff in there. If you've got an athlete that, especially if it's more of an endurance athlete, you're trying to get those carbohydrates up and along with their protein, Beans and lentils are a great way to do it. Also a pretty inexpensive source of protein, so lots of good stuff there. Dairy is going to be featured on just about all the rest of these, but dairy is kind of cool because it really depends on the form that we have our dairy in. So I've got on here regular yogurt. If a yogurt's flavored, if it's got a little bit of sugar in it, then it's going to have more carbohydrates. If it's a no-fat yogurt, if it's a no-fat Greek yogurt, it's almost exclusively protein. But so yeah, depends on how we manipulate dairy is how it sort of fits into things. Protein sources?
Beef.
Beef, meat, chicken, fish, tofu, thank you. Eggs? We're calling eggs. Eggs is either in the protein or it's in the protein fat one. I actually can't remember where I've got it here, but it's definitely on there.
Full egg or white egg?
Yeah. So all of our animal proteins, lots of protein there, wild game meats, tofu, your leaner dairy sources, so Greek yogurt, cottage cheese. I do have eggs on here, but it depends. Eggs are about half fat, half protein. If you're just going egg whites, it's pretty much only protein. Whey protein, edamame beans, soybeans, almost exclusively protein. Eggs could have been in that middle combo. Any other protein-fat combo guesses? Dairy, yeah. What kind of dairy?
Yeah, it would be like the non-flavored yogurt, I guess.
Cottage cheese.
Non-flavored, yeah, something with a little higher fat. Yeah.
Like salmon, like a fattier fish.
It could be. I think I left all my meat stuff in the middle, but for sure, like a higher fat. It could be a higher fat meat. Like if you've got something like a bacon or something that's got a fair bit of fat on it. Combo for sure. Any other guesses? Yeah, all of our nuts, our nut butters, those are going to be on there. So your cheeses, seeds, hemp hearts, nuts, nut butters, all those are going to be on our combos. And then what about pure fats?
Olive oil.
Olive oil for sure. Avocado, thank you.
Butter.
Lard, butter, yeah. Mayonnaise. So any of your oils are going to be on there. Butter, margarine, mayonnaise. The big point about this is just sort of say, like, even though we might know that carbs give us energy or that fat's really good for our immune system, protein helps repair muscles, where those foods actually come from does get a little bit trickier. And then very rarely do we just eat one of those things. Every once in a while somebody might sit down and just have a straight pork chop, but a lot of the time you're having the pork chop alongside some applesauce, some rice, some coleslaw. You're having a bit more of a meal. So we're sort of putting those things together.
I didn't see rice in there. No rice. Disappointing.
I thought I had it. You're right. Yeah, rice is making on there. Rice is in the carbs.
He took it out because he knew.
I knew we'd have lots of questions about rice.
Do you think the body can tell the difference between I'm getting my protein from tofu, then from fish, then from chicken?
A little bit.
Or is protein protein?
There's an awesome question. You do have complete proteins versus incomplete proteins. And then that ties into how well things digest. Tofu is very well digested, and it's a very bioavailable source of protein. So if you're eating tofu, you're digesting almost all of that, which is great. Most of your animal proteins are also very easily digested, and you're getting almost all of it. Eggs are a little bit less, dairy is a little bit less. It tends to be still pretty similar though. Like if you're looking at, say, a source that's not that well digested, like say some of our, what's the example there? I'm thinking of soybeans can be kind of tough to digest. There's a lot of fiber on there. It's not as biologically available as, say, tofu. You're still getting about 75% of the tofu, of the protein that's in there. So you're getting quite a bit of protein from that. Is it as biologically available as beef? No, but it's still pretty good. Yeah, so can our body tell the difference? Yes, it can. Does it really matter over the course of the day? Probably not too much. Unless you've got an athlete that is really struggling to get their protein in them, I'm not too worried about sort of where those sources are coming from. For the most part, things are pretty well digested, pretty well absorbed.
Question.
Yeah.
Is the difference for the body between the plant proteins and animal proteins?
Typically, we see that animal proteins are a little bit more digested, and that they're almost always complete proteins. So complete proteins are kind of broken down. They've got built amino acids, so they've got a bunch of building blocks that come together to form a protein. Our animal proteins have all of the building blocks for them, so that's great. We love that. Our plant proteins typically don't have all of them. They have most of the building blocks, but not always. So kind of in order to make a full protein, you have to combine two plant sources together. A lot of the time people hear that and they say, okay, so this is worse. We should be just sticking to the animal proteins if we're trying to gain muscle. But usually what we find is that, say, having beans and rice, those are two incomplete proteins, but together they have all the building blocks that we need. So if you're combining those two together, then you have a complete protein. And you don't have to eat them at the same time. If you're eating them kind of throughout the same day, you're still able to build those complete proteins. So are animal proteins superior? I would probably say that they're easier to digest. But I hesitate to say they're superior because I think you can do just about all the same things you can out of plant-based protein that you can out of an animal-based protein. It's a little bit easier out of the animal-based protein to sort of get those protein requirements, but you get other good things out of the plant-based. You're getting that extra bit of fiber, you're getting a little bit more energy out of it, you're getting some more vitamins and minerals that you wouldn't be out of the animal protein. So I feel like there's pros and cons. I really don't think that it needs to be one or the other. Unless an athlete is a strict vegetarian and they really don't want to eat any animal-based proteins. If that's the case, they really have to be on top of their diet because it is a little bit harder to meet all their protein needs just through plant-based proteins. Not to say they can't do it, but it's a little bit harder for them to do. So they have to be a little more dialed into their nutrition. Yeah, does that help? Sorry, I felt like I started going on a tangent right away.
No, that's fine. I just want to know, and they are compatible, like protein, animal or plant protein can be consumed together?
Yes, absolutely.
No problem.
Very, very appropriate, and it's going to be very beneficial. I really don't think that you need to do, to say like the one or the other. The more that we can kind of get some protein sources from different sources, the more benefit you get. It also saves you a ton of money. If you're making, say, a burrito and you're using that ground beef, and then you mix in some black beans to it, well, we're getting a little bit of extra protein from that, and it keeps the food bill down a little bit. So if we can do that, I'm thrilled. Yeah. Another question?
Yeah, so in terms of the animal protein, let's say there's chicken, there's fish, beef, lamb, pork. Which one we can put as a higher priority to use daily? Or which could we put at down the list?
Yeah, any of your lean proteins are going to be very beneficial. There's different things that you get out of each one. So say, if you're having beef, you tend to get more iron out of, say, beef and chicken. You're going to get a little bit more iron than you would out of pork. So especially if you have an athlete, maybe it's a female athlete who is menstruating and their iron needs are a little bit higher. So going for the beef might be a better choice for that athlete. But we know there's lots of benefits to having that good brain health from the omega-3s, omega-6s that you're getting out of the fish. So trying to incorporate from different sources is probably going to be your best option, rather than saying, this is your number one source, this is your number two source. Choosing from a variety is going to be your best choice.
Would you recommend to take some like supplement or like omega-3 supplement instead of eating fish?
If they don't eat any fish, probably. If the athlete really does not have any fish, you can get a lot of the omega-3s from olive oil, so that can be a good option as well. But there is some good benefits to the sort of fatty acids from fish. If they aren't having any at all, it is something that maybe we'd look at if it's worth taking. Yes, sir?
Is organic stuff going to make a big difference?
Won't make a difference at all. Organic, usually the stuff that's on if it's got the organic on the label, means that the company had to pay some money to a certifying board that said this is organic. The quality is going to be almost identical from non-organic to organic.
One more question.
Yeah.
How do you compare the seed oil versus regular like animal oil?
Yep. No difference. There's so much noise about seed oil at the moment for why it's awful. Those claims are really based on some bad science. We haven't seen any sort of negative impacts from the seed oils. Olive oil is going to be probably one of your best options, just because it does have a really good mix of sort of those omega-3s, omega-6s. So that's one that I would say recommending more than some of the other options out there. But yeah, it's not one that I'd say, avoiding seed oil is going to be bad for you, or not having any animal fats is going to be a problem for you. Just in sort of incorporating, again, from a variety.
Then how about saturated fat and unsaturated fat?
Yeah. So the reason why we usually go for that unsaturated fat, or why I would recommend that, is because you do get a few more of those omega-3s, omega-6s, which is good for brain health. You still get some of those from the animal fats, just not as many. So that's why I'd say, choosing the olive oil rather than choosing your butter is probably going to be a good move. But to say you can never have butter, you always have to have olive oil, I don't believe in that at all.
And in case of the seed oil, which one do you have any recommendation? Which one would be prioritized better than the other?
They're all going to have different profiles, and really going for something, they have different profiles in terms of their omega-3, omega-6s, which there's benefits to omega-3s, there's benefits to omega-6s. They're going to have different pros and cons to them. Another one to sort of pay attention to is the smoke point. So if you're using it for cooking, there's some, like say an olive oil's got a pretty low smoke point. So if you're frying something in olive oil, the temperature that you have to keep it at is pretty low, so it doesn't tend to be a very useful oil for frying. If you're using something like a canola oil, it's got quite a high smoke point, so that might be better to cook your food in, because you want to try and keep things below that smoke point to sort of avoid, it's more of there's some rancidity, some issues that can come with it. Love it, thank you guys. Okay, flying along here. A little bit that I'll talk about, sort of the repair, refuel, rehydrate, and then I'll touch quickly on some of the rest reset pieces. You're mostly, probably this, you guys might have seen this, we switched to this Canada's Food Guide plate in 2018. We used to have the food pyramid or the rainbow, depending if you're looking at the Canadian or the US stuff. The general recommendations, though, that we started to see were that we used to tell people we want you eating X amount of servings of these foods. What we found was that most people didn't know what a serving size was. They didn't know what a grain option was. So we said, well, let's throw that out and let's kind of come up with this plate model. And the idea behind it is saying that if most of the food that you're eating, most of your meals you're having, kind of work on the same structure, where about half of it is veggies and fruits, about a quarter of its proteins, and about a quarter of its carbohydrates, then for most people, they're getting the right amount of fiber, of vitamins and minerals, they're getting the right amount of protein, they're getting the right amount of carbohydrate energy throughout the course of their day. So we feel that this is a good recommendation for most people most of the time. The tricky thing is that we're not working with most people, we're working with athletes. So our athlete needs are going to change a little bit. And there are three things that we can change. We can change the quality, we can change the quantity, and we can change the timing. So quality is sort of the choices that we're actually making. The quantity is how much an athlete is eating, and then the timing is when they're eating. So with that in mind, I've got, I know this is kind of tough to see in the very back there, stole this from the US Olympic Committee. They came up with this really nice design for, they call it the athlete plate system. But what it essentially is it starts off very similar to our Canada's Food Guide plate, where we say that if an athlete is on a taper, if they are having a few days off, if training is really light, then what we want them to have is something very similar to that Canada's Food Guide plate, where about half of their plate is veggies and fruits, about a quarter of the plate is protein, and about a quarter of the plate is carbohydrates. If they're doing that, probably have enough protein to sort of sustain their muscle function. They probably have enough energy to perform well in the sessions. They're getting enough vitamins, enough minerals, enough fiber from those veggies and fruits for a healthy body. As soon as those energy needs pick up, as soon as the athlete is doing more work and they're using more energy, we want to put more energy into their bodies. The way we're going to do that is through the carbohydrates. So we want to increase the amount of carbohydrates that the athlete is eating over the course of the day. There's only so much room in the stomach, so even though we can make the plate a little bit bigger, we can increase the amount of food that they're getting throughout the day, we're kind of messing around with proportions. So we're going to increase the carbohydrates a little bit, and we're going to scale back on the veggies and fruits. We want to keep the protein about the same, about a quarter of their intake. Again, because protein is not a very good fuel source, but we do need it for that muscle repair and regrowth. And then when we've got athletes that are working really hard, so it could be a couple training sessions a day, it could be they're in a training camp, we know they're using lots of energy, so we want to give them more energy. Again, that energy coming from the carbohydrates. So on the really tough days, we want them looking at about half of their intake coming from carbohydrates, about a quarter of the intake is coming from protein, and about a quarter from the veggies and fruits. And if they're able to do that, then we think that they've got the best chance possible to get the right amount of energy, to sustain themselves, to recover from their training. They've got the right amount of protein to regain that muscle function, and they're still getting some of those veggies to give us the vitamins and minerals that we need for healthy metabolisms and good immune systems. Looking at this, it seems really easy. Seems like a simple thing to do. Just that idea of when an athlete's working harder, we want to give them more energy, that energy coming in carbohydrates. In practice, it can be quite tough. I find that this is one of the biggest things that high-performance athletes do struggle with, is adjusting their diet where they are on the training cycle, depending on what their training day looks like. I've got lots of athletes that I work with, and they say, hey, you don't have to worry about me. I eat a great diet. I eat rice, I eat broccoli, I eat chicken. I eat that 365 days of the year. I don't change a thing, and I'm dialed in. And we say, cool, your training's not the same every day of the year, so I think that you're probably not recovering as well as you could. You're probably not maximizing your gains as well as you could. Adjusting your diet really allows you to have that right amount of energy for what you have to do. I have these listed as days, which is a nice way to think about it. But it's also worth mentioning that we've got to think about it for training periods as well. So if you've got a 10-day training camp, and 5 days into the training camp, you're giving your guys an active recovery day, where maybe they're just doing a light stretch. Even though they barely did anything, they're not using a lot of energy that day, they're still recovering from the work they did before, and they're trying to prepare for the work coming up. So probably wouldn't go all the way back to the blue plate. I might scale to the gray plate. I might even keep it at the hard plate, sort of depending on what the actual needs of the athlete might be.
Question?
Yes?
So in the carbs or veggies and fruit, you don't recommend them for like your carb on a plate, or would you still use like a sweet potato or something like that? Could that go more to the grains or the
Phenomenal.
carbs at all?
Yeah, absolutely it could. You're going to have sort of in your veggies and in your fruits, you've got a bit of a range of what's going to give you sort of those carbohydrates. So something like, say, beans or zucchini, like green beans, or zucchini, are pretty low carbohydrate vegetables. Something like a sweet potato or a squash, bananas, those are pretty high carbohydrate veggies. So those ones probably easier to incorporate into your carbohydrate section. But if you're filling up your plate on lettuce and you're thinking, well, this is my carbohydrate, probably not.
But like peppers, would peppers still be in there? Or?
Pretty low carbohydrates, and I feel like sometimes that's where it gets almost tricky of saying, well, this is my vegetable, this is my carbohydrate, and you sort of have to look at it and say, which vegetable are you having? How much of that vegetable are you having? So the starchy ones, your squashes, your potatoes, your sweet potatoes, those tend to have lots of carbohydrates. The other ones, a lot less. Yes, sir?
You mentioned the athlete that's dialed in, always eating rice, chicken, broccoli. Works for some people. Can they take that and eat the same foods and just adjust the portions? Or is there a large benefit to diversity of your diet?
There's a huge benefit to diversity. Even that would be my first negotiating tactic with the athlete who's saying, this is what I'm eating and it's perfect. I'd say, well, can we adjust the energy? So can we put a little more energy on your plate when you have those bigger days and a little bit less on the easier days? But for sure, the more that we're learning, and I sort of mentioned that with the fiber, we're getting vitamins, we're getting minerals, we're getting lots of stuff from different foods. So when you can kind of have that broader approach to your diet, that's when we know that an athlete's going to get the right stuff. If you're just having, say, the broccoli, the rice, the chicken, you're probably hitting most of those needs, but I'm guessing you're deficient in one or two things. Yes, sir?
So, if an athlete's training, like maybe an hour and a half a training session, probably easy and moderate, do you consider that?
It's going to depend on a lot of things. It'll depend on what the athlete's sort of baseline is. So if they're training an hour and a half every day, then yeah, probably the gray day is probably appropriate for them. If the athlete usually trains for about 30 minutes, or they're training once or twice a week, and then you've got them doing an hour and a half, that's a big jump for them. So that's when I want to give them extra energy for what they're used to having. Does that kind of make sense?
Kind of. So I was trying to differentiate, because maybe an hour and a half is pretty standard for club training, probably. And then when they go to like training camps, so they're training twice a day, then that's hard training for sure, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was just trying to say that if you've got to look at sort of what the athlete typically does. That if they're used to training an hour and a half a day, that's what they're doing, 5 days a week, and then they have a couple days off. Then we're going from the gray back down to the blue. But if they're an athlete who usually trains 30 minutes a day, and then they go up to an hour and a half, that's when we're saying, well, we've got to give you extra energy for what you're used to. Yes, sir.
I have a question. So how do you control the anger to? Yeah. Because it's very important to not overeat before the training, and you have to eat proportionally right food to get enough energy. It consumes and boosts you in the training, and when you come back from the training, you still you eat food now. Because you spend energy, and how to control it, and not jump in the food if your food is not ready. So like just some families not helping themselves to prepare that.
Yeah.
It's your job now out of the competition when you travel somewhere, find a store, whatever, just get the food. Bunch of junk food easy to get. So like this is oh, it's true. It's like of athlete outside of the dojo. If you go outside, then you're gonna get trouble. So you have to have, you don't have a mom or dad all the time who are going to be cooked and bring food for you. So you need to understand how we can bring the athlete for this level to explain them, hey, control it.
Yeah.
So some readiness or what? What's the tactic for that? I know maybe it's not your side of the, but it's still.
No, I can't remember if I talked about it here, but having that game plan of this is the strategy that we want to be doing leading up to a competition, where they actually would spend the time writing out, this is what I'm going to be eating 2 hours before my event, this is what I'm going to eat 30 minutes after my event, between events, where they can actually think about that and plan it out. That's one step. Another one that I always try to encourage is, you don't want to be changing things when we're now in a competition. So if you've got a good sort of situation at home and you're used to, I'm fueling a certain way and these are the foods that I'm used to eating, and now all of a sudden I'm on the road and I'm changing things completely, like we would never encourage our athletes to do that. We don't want them to try something brand new into a competition. So try to emphasize those points to, if this is what you usually do day in, day out throughout your training, and now we're at a competition, like, well, if you're not usually going to McDonald's after your training session, why would you go to McDonald's after your competition? Trying to enforce that repetition from what they're traditionally using.
Yeah, but I know. I'm wondering. So I saw your background. You work with your skating, bobsleigh, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever help to people like athletes, teams with control the weight, because the judo is the weight, wrestling, boxing, just like skating even also is control the weight because it's but it's the, so did you give them any because particularly for 48 kilo control it's understandable, but 90 kilo athletes it's going to be trying to help them, teaching, hey, just control your food. He said, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat you now. So I was 78 kilo athletes. If they're fighting with you, they will try to control.
And you're going to have those, I'd say it's going to be so individual for some of those athletes, where you've got some people that they're naturally around that 95 and they don't have any issues, they can eat whatever they want, and it's not going to go up, and you've got other athletes that are dropping down, and it is a real struggle for them. So that's when you have to get into the very specifics for if you're an athlete who you sit around 95 and this is what you're usually doing, then we really don't have to mess around with anything. But if we are on now, we've lost 5 kilos up to this competition, we've got to maintain that throughout the competition, that's when we have to be a little bit more mindful of sort of the options we're taking.
So discipline and mental preparing, that kind of this stuff?
Pretty much. There's a few things that I can talk about of some of the foods that you're going to choose that might make you feel a little bit more full, that are not going to affect that weight, not affect the water retention as much. So things like lower carbohydrate, lower sodium, lower water foods. All of those will make a big difference so that they can still have something that they're going to feel reasonably full on, but isn't going to get the weight to shoot back up again.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Regarding, you said fry. Olive oil, maybe it's not good for frying the things when it passes.
Yeah.
But could you consider pork fat or lard is okay if you use that?
It will have a higher smoke point,
Yeah.
so it's not going to spoil as quickly. Essentially, that's what it is.
Okay.
So you can cook something at a higher smoke point and still not ruin the food. Whereas with, say, olive oil, if you cook it at a high point, it almost has like a burnt taste to it, and that's no good.
Okay, one more question.
Yes.
As proteins are kind of preferred for restoring and rebuilding the muscles, should they be preferably consumed after the workout?
Yes. It's not as important as carbohydrates after the workout, but there's a little bit of benefit to having it after the workout rather than before. Not a huge amount though. We used to think that it was really, really important, and I'm jumping ahead myself, I've got a little bit about this in a couple slides, but we used to think that within 30 minutes, if you don't get your protein in you, that workout was a huge waste of time. You didn't do anything. We know that's not true anymore. That kind of the protein, if you've had it within 24 hours, you probably have the right amount of protein in you to sort of synthesize that muscle regrowth. So it's more important to have the protein throughout the day. Carbohydrates, on the other hand, you've got to get those carbohydrates in your athletes within, say, that's 30 to 60 minutes after a workout to sort of help that muscle rebuilding process. It's sort of a twofold. But yeah, protein's important. The timing of it's less important. Carbohydrates, the timing of carbohydrates is very important.
Thank you.
No.
So try to not consume carbohydrate like next hour after training, yeah? Kind of.
Try to. We want them to.
Try to.
No, we want them to consume.
Get it.
Yes. Yeah, the carbohydrates within that 30 to 60 minutes, very beneficial. Yeah.
Before and after, right? Before and after.
Before, so actually, jump into the next one here. One way to think about it is what are they using, what are they losing? So if you've got an athlete who's getting ready for an event, I want to make sure they've got enough energy to perform at that event. So I want to put energy into the body. That energy is going to be carbohydrates. They go do their event. They use some energy. They probably did some muscle damage. They broke down a little bit of muscle. Maybe they sweat a little bit. So I'm thinking about what are they using, what are they losing? Energy before the event. After the event, I want to put that energy back in their body. I want to put some protein to help that muscle regrowth. And if they sweat, I want to put some fluids back in them. But just that idea of what are you using, what are you losing? Energy before, energy after. You've broken down some muscle, putting some of that protein back in you is going to be beneficial. Timing of the protein after is a little less essential. Okay, skipping through this one here. Do we have to fuel during a training session? What does it depend on?
Length and intensity.
Length, intensity. Our general recommendation is if something's less than an hour, the athlete probably has enough energy on board to perform well at that training session. As soon as it's longer than an hour, they've run through the stores that they have on board, that's stored in their muscle, that's stored in their liver. So adding a little bit of energy to the athlete is going to help that performance. So if they're doing a session that's an hour and a half, putting a little bit of energy, carbohydrates, into their body throughout that session is going to help the performance to the tail end of the session. You don't have to stress too much about sort of the grams per hour. For judo athletes, probably 30 to 60 grams, so that's, if we're thinking of bananas, that's probably 2 to 3 bananas for a 2-hour session. Very unlikely that an athlete's going to choose to have 3 bananas. You're mostly likely going to get your carbohydrates through, if that's through a sport drink like a Gatorade, if that's through a gel, if that's through a bar. But yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at. If something's less than 60 minutes of a medium-high intensity, they really don't need any fuel on board. If it's longer than that 60 minutes, we'd love them to put a little something on there.
Question.
Yes?
Sometimes the judo athletes, they need weight control.
They need what, sorry?
For competition.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They need the weight control.
Yes.
But they high training so hard.
So the easiest, when we get to say 24 hours before an event, that's when we can start to manipulate water. Leading up to that, say if it's maybe a week out of an event, I'm not too focused on the water at that point. I'm more looking at sort of food intake. But the 24 hours kind of leading up to an event, the things that you can play around with are all fluids. So if the athlete, we don't want them to come into a competition dehydrated. We're at a higher risk of sort of muscle tears, muscle pulls, but ways to sort of make them feel more hydrated while they are sort of shedding that extra water weight. Chewing gum is a big one. That can sort of increase sort of the salivatory, make them feel less thirsty. Ice chips are a big one as well, that you're not actually putting that much fluid into your body, but it makes you feel a little bit more hydrated. And then you're like sipping to thirst. So you're really trying not to over consume those fluids. I would encourage your athletes to actually measure out how much water that they are taking, because it can be really easy to say, like, oh, I'm thirsty, and now I've drank a full one of those giant Stanley water bottles that are 2 liters, and 2 liters of water, that's 2 kilos. So that can make a tremendous difference for an athlete. So it's got to be very important to have that prescription around sort of their water intake. And sort of having those tools to sort of manage the sensation of not having enough fluids. Does that kind of help?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We talked a little bit about kind of that recovery timing. I've got more on that sort of the next slide here. Recovery is super, super important when your athletes are doing 2 sessions a day, when they're in camp, when those sessions are really tough. When their sessions are maybe 1 a day and they're not that tough, recovery becomes a little less essential. And when I'm talking about recovery, I kind of break it down into 3 phases. I've got my immediate phase, so that's within that 30 to 60 minutes. I've got my secondary phase, that's within sort of the 2 to 4 hours. And then I've got my hydrate phase. So that kind of starts as soon as their event is over or their training session is over. And that continues on until we would say they've been rehydrated. When I'm talking about these specifically, that's step 1. I mentioned there, so within that 30 to 60 minutes, we want to get carbs back in them. That's the energy. So you're looking for something with some carbohydrates in it. It depends on where you guys are, that if you're able to keep things refrigerated, that makes a difference versus if they have to bring something from school that can't be refrigerated for the whole day. Not too tough for carbs, but it does tend to be pretty tricky for protein. So that's when you might go for your protein powders or your jerkies, something that doesn't need to be refrigerated. But if they are able to keep things cool, Greek yogurt, hard-boiled eggs, great sources of protein. Stage 2 is we're thinking of that meal. So your athlete finishes up their training session. They've used some energy, they've broken down the muscle. We want to put something back in them within that 30 to 60 minutes. That means they've got to have some planning. They've got to bring this with them to their competition venue, to their training facility. We can't be finishing up the session and then they've got to drive home and see what's in the fridge for them to make it. This is something that we want to encourage our athletes to be taking control of and be accountable for themselves. They should have it in their bag. They should have it in their lockers. They've got to have this with them. And then what it does is it allows them to buy time to get home and have that proper meal. We had that question there about kind of protein versus carbohydrates for recovery. What we've really found is that either one is beneficial. Either having protein, either having carbohydrates, there is a benefit to that. When you can have both of them together, the benefit is greater than the sum of either one. So when you're pairing carbs and protein together for that recovery snack, it's more beneficial than having either just carbs or just protein by a considerable margin. So recovery snack, a little bit of carbs, a little bit of protein, lets them get time to get home and have a meal.
Question?
Yes?
Just for sports specific, with judo, our classes are late, so
Mm-hmm.
most of the time we're leaving at 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Is having that 30 grams of carbs/protein good enough for them just to go to bed after? Like, and then getting up and having a breakfast? Is it, like, they need to get up for school instead
Yeah.
of having a meal right after, or 2 hours after training?
It becomes so athlete specific. That, you know, if you're home, if it's 10 o'clock, a lot of athletes would really struggle to sit down and have a full dinner again at 10 o'clock and think that they're going to fall asleep and then get up at 7 the next. Some athletes have no problem with it, where they would get home and if they don't do that, they're going to wake up at 3 in the morning, they're going to be starving. So it is really athlete dependent. What I would encourage you as much as you can that to have that snack as quickly as possible after their training session. So say if it's, you know, they're leaving the gym, it's 9:30 at night, it's a half hour for them to get home. At the very least, if they can have that high carb, high protein snack right after that training session, it'll hopefully give them a little bit of time to digest before they can get home and go to sleep. So starting with that snack would be the best recommendation I can get. If they're not able to have that full meal after, that's okay.
Like, I'm thinking, like, do I prioritize 8+ hours of sleep, or do I prioritize this meal 2 hours after training?
Yeah.
I think sleep would be more important for my thoughts, but.
Probably, I'm probably going to agree with you. Again, it really does depend on the athlete. And then if there's things you can do to maybe, instead of just having that smaller snack after the workout, if they could have something that was a little bit bigger. You know, so it's not just that granola bar and a couple pieces of jerky. It's they're having half of the leftover of dinner. They're having half a sandwich or something.
Like they have a sandwich or something.
Yeah. Then it's that bigger snack, and that at least gives them a little bit more fuel that goes into them. Because yeah, it's absolutely, it can be impractical.
One more question.
Yes?
Is it healthy in general to have a solid protein meal before going to the bed?
Say that again, please.
Is it healthy in general to have a protein meal after the practice late in the night and go to the bed right after?
If you sleep okay, go ahead.
Yeah, really, like if they're able to sleep.
Like stand up, the digestion, how it goes.
Yeah, if they're able to sleep, it's not a problem. We used to think that you know, you're having snacks, having calories right before bed, it's going to be stored as fat. We know that's not true anymore. So having those late night snacks right before bed, especially for growing athletes, it can be a way for them to sleep better than other athletes, where they're going to be fueling their body as they sleep. So there's nothing wrong with it, but it does just become so athlete dependent, where some people find that if I'm going to have a meal 20 minutes before I go to sleep, all night I'm tossing and turning and I don't get a restful sleep. So there's no health benefit or risk to doing it. There's no reason they can't, except for quality of sleep.
Good.
Okay. You guys are usually pretty good with the hydration. I don't want to talk about water manipulation here. Big ticket items. Our athletes, you know, we see them walking around now. They've got those giant Stanley water bottles. They're tend to be quite well hydrated. Hydration doesn't seem to be a big issue for most of our athletes right now. With you guys, you know, most of you are spending time with scales. They sort of do know roughly what their weights are. Something that you can do once in a while that is kind of fun is you can do a sweat rate calculation. This can be helpful for when they do get into water manipulation if they are trying to make weight, but to roughly know that how much they're sweating in an hour. So the way that would work is, you know, they come to practice, they stand on a scale, they go do something that's pretty hard, the cardiovascular type workout, they're sweating a lot, they come back on the scale, and then the difference between what they weighed at the start of the training versus the end of training, that would be sort of their sweat rate. You have to factor in how much water they drank during that training session as well to get an accurate picture of it. But really what that does for you is it lets you know that if, you know, if Johnny started the training session at 90 kilos and he finished it at 89 kilos and the session was an hour, then we know Johnny can sweat about about a liter of fluids when he needs to. Can be helpful for when you have to sort of make that weight. And typically what we would recommend is, because we don't take water back on at a 1-to-1 ratio, so we would encourage the athlete to put what they lost plus a little bit more. I've got on here 125%, so you know, if Johnny lost that kilo of water, that's a liter of water. We want him to drink a liter plus a cup over the next couple hours, just sort of to get those fluids back into him.
When you do this test, are you letting them drink throughout or no?
I would, and you just have to track the fluids. And that just lets you know sort of what their sweat rate actually is. You don't need to restrict their fluids throughout. So the easiest way to do it is they hop on the scale at the start of training session with the water they're going to be drinking. They do their session, they sweat, they drink some water, they hop on the scale again, they're still holding that same water bottle because they took that fluid into them. The difference that they're going to see is just the sweat. So that's the easiest way to do it. I'm eating into your lunchtime already. Okay.
Couple times.
Okay. Real quick here, sleep. Good questions about sleep. We love sleep. Our athletes, they're hit and miss. We know that for most of our younger athletes, that 9 to 10 hours of sleep is really what they should be shooting for. Encourage as best you can to try and have that consistent bedtime routine. So that means, you know, 30 minutes before bed, they're not looking at their screens. They're trying to go to bed roughly around the same time. They're trying to wake up roughly around the same time. It's just going to be much more beneficial for their recovery, for their hormone regeneration, their muscle growth, as opposed to having a few days that are early to bed and a few days that are really late getting up. Athletes love to sleep in when they get the chance, but trying to have that consistent routine is going to be more advantageous to them than sort of being 7 hours of sleep 5 days a week and 2 days a week where they're catching up on that rest. Tough to do, but that's our recommendation. I'll see for this reset piece. So if your athletes are on top of their rest, they're on top of their recovery, they're on top of their nutrition, what we would like to see is we want to make sure that they've got enough energy to be getting through the training sessions. They should be able to recover quickly between training sessions. So if an athlete performs really well in the morning and they're dragging their butt in the afternoon, then we're trying to figure out, was there something we can improve with their nutrition? Can we improve their rest? If you find that your athletes are getting sick a lot or getting hurt a lot, especially bone fractures, that's one that we want to circle back and see, is there anything we can improve nutritionally? Is there anything we can improve with their rest or recovery? Mood can be a big indicator. If you get an athlete who gets quite grouchy, gets really short all of a sudden, I'm checking in, I'm saying, are you sleeping okay? Are you eating okay? GI symptoms are a huge one. If an athlete is dealing with constipation, if they're dealing with diarrhea, nausea, typically that's an indicator that they're under more stress than they otherwise would be. So if that stress is because of a training load, that's one thing. If the stress is because they're under fueling, that's another one. When an athlete does get sick, does get hurt, are they able to come back and heal at a reasonable time, or is it taking them forever to come back from those illnesses? If it's taking them a long time, I'm checking in with them. Sleep quality, most of our athletes now, they're wearing those smartwatches. They've got some kind of sleep tracker. It's pretty cool. So if they do notice that all of a sudden, they're trying to go to bed on time, they're trying to put their screens down, and they're just tossing and turning all night, that's when I want to see, are you still on top of your nutrition? Are you doing your recovery? Is there anything else we can improve here? I've got on there that if the training increases, they're able to adjust nutrition. Again, that's just such an important one, that as the training increases or decreases, they're adjusting the nutrition. Got on here sort of the menstruation. It's a sensitive one for coaches to be touching in on, but I will just sort of mention here, we know that a little more than half of our female athletes are on some sort of hormonal contraceptive. So if they're on a hormonal contraceptive, then we don't consider that to be a regular menstrual cycle. That just means that it's probably not coming in at a rate that we would typically expect. No problem with that. The only issue is that sometimes if they're starting a hormonal contraceptive or stopping one, that they might be more likely to see a change. And that is what we're looking for as a red flag. So that if the athlete is menstruating and they're having a change, whether that's in duration, whether that's in frequency, from what they're typically having, that can be a very good indicator that they're under-fueling, they're overtrained, that something's not quite right. Yeah, so what I love to recommend to athletes and for coaches as well, if you are able to track some of these things, tracking their injuries, tracking sort of weight changes, if it's big jumps, if it's big losses, having the athletes track their own sleep, having the athletes track their own mood, and sort of syncing that up with sort of the training log that you guys are prescribing, can make a big difference for you being able to identify problems sooner rather than later. I'm going to stop her there. You guys asked a lot of good questions, so we went a little bit slower, but that's okay. More questions? Well, I've got you just before I escape. Yes, sir?
How about sleeping?
Yeah.
You recommend 8 to 10 hours, right?
Yeah, if we can.
If we can.
If they can. That's the goal.
Is that based on ages also?
We know that adolescents are going to need a little bit more, so we'd rather they're shooting for that 9 to 10. But there's stories of high performance athletes. Roger Federer, when he was winning everything, he was trying to get 12 hours a night. LeBron James was about the same. He'd go for I think it was 10, and then he had a 2-hour nap in the middle of the day. There's not a lot of people who are able to do that, but we do know that sleep is just so beneficial to an athlete's recovery, to their performance. It can be really tough, but if you've got that athlete that's only getting 7 hours routinely, if you're able to work with them a little bit, are we able to adjust training times? Are we able to do something to let them get that little bit more sleep and see if that's going to improve their performance? The older vote, you probably need a little bit less, and it depends on what you're doing. If you're not working as hard as the athletes, then maybe 7 hours is fine for you.
These guys work harder than that.
Okay.
Specifically that day.
Yeah.
Mentally.
Okay, guys. Like I mentioned, we're hopefully in the future we're going to try to do an online session for the parents to kind of just check in, and again, they're the ones buying the groceries and doing all the the nutritional fueling of a lot of your athletes, okay, as much as we look at this, you have your scope of practice, okay, so that means that you know some stuff, but it's your scope of practice. If you really have athletes that need to work with somebody, they have to work with a professional. You can have recommendations and everything, and again, Joe Rogan says one thing, but that's not what, or this say, or this or that. You're not even an expert in anything in this field, but you can give the most basic recommendations and just stay within your scope of practice, okay? And that's, again, this is tough because you are working with athletes that are losing weight, and you are having people, hey coach, what do I eat tonight? And these are the questions. How much do I drink? How much should I drink? What do you think I'm going to float tonight when I lose? And these are the tough questions. And what I'm telling you is, again, the better health that they can have away from the competition and they're eating healthy, okay, then they're going to keep those habits going when they're starting to do their weight cut, okay? And then we have to, again, just try to keep them safe. And then the one thing is the athletes are going to want to make weight, right? And we have to kind of like keep them as healthy, both nutritionally and mentally during that period of time that they're trying to do it.